This is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop MC, and the chair of BLM Tokyo, who I understand actually is in Tokyo this week.
Yes, I am finally in Tokyo, and it's been about 3 years since I've been up here in Tokyo, and everybody's looking like they're infected. I'm just like, yo, get away from me, just stay away, give me space.
Everyone looks like they're infected. What do you mean?
Because I live out in the country, and so there's not a lot of people, and so like the whole COVID thing, there's not so many people around. It's easy to keep that distance, but Tokyo is a big city like New York, and so there's crowds, there's people everywhere, and it's just like, oh my God, leave me alone, get away from me.
So it's a shock for you.
Yeah. Stop breathing my air.
Tokyo is a big, noisy city, and so we have an appropriate guest, Justin Zorn, who is an author. In fact, just came out with the book Golden. And let me get this title right. It's Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. Thank you for joining us, Justin.
Good to be with you, Mike and Jay. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And we want to talk about that. Last week, we actually alluded to it because we recapped this rally that we did out in the Rockaways for the Queens Link, we call it, which is a plan to reactivate the old Rockaway Beach line of the Long Island Railroad to improve transportation in the city. But a lot of that conversation is about noise, quite frankly, and how noisy are these trains going to be running through neighborhoods. So there's talk about light rail and new technology to kind of mitigate against some of those concerns. I know you wrote an op-ed in the Daily News with your co-author, Lee Mars, on New York City itself being too noisy, because the book is not just about New York City, obviously it's a more general thing, but you wrote in the Daily News about New York City. So can you tell us why you think New York City is too noisy and why that matters?
Yes, sir. Yeah. The New York Daily News piece was about why noise really actually matters for our health and our ability to think. And that it's not just your imagination, like the city actually is louder than it's ever been. There's a researcher who looked at the sound of fire engines in 1912, and they got up to 96 decibels when you were standing 11 feet away. And then by 1974, it was 114 decibels at the same distance. The last time they did that research in 2019, fire engine sirens were 123 decibels. So it might not sound like a huge increase, but since decibels are on this, logarithmic scale, 90 decibels is actually 10 times as much sound pressure as 80 decibels. So it's twice as loud to the ears. So fire engines are like a really good proxy for how noisy things actually are, because they have to be loud enough, to break through the surrounding soundscape. Right. So we've been looking in this book. It's about the power of silence, about silence, why silence matters for our ability to hear one another, our ability to think clearly, and our health. And so we looked, even though New York is, of course, like baked into the DNA of the city, screeching subways and roaring garbage trucks and those hydraulic bus lifts and barking dogs and, jackhammers, the whole thing, stand clear of the closing doors. Like it actually is louder than it's ever been. And and that's compounding all the noise that we're dealing with when you think about, dealing with devices, dealing with always on kind of culture. So it's a cognitive overload that adds another level to the auditory overload.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious with decibels, just to give kind of a comparison, if you're aware, what's a good or safe decibel level for our hearing? Did that ever come up in the research?
Levels like what we're talking about with a city fire truck is pretty dangerous, is my understanding.
Right.
I don't know the exact levels. I haven't been looking at that so much in the research, but but a lot of the research I've seen from the World Health Organization based on those standards, for example, we're showing that 9 out of 10 adults in the city were exposed to levels that the EPA considers harmful to health.
Wow. That's a really interesting point, because when I was in school, I would hear my teachers always complaining about noise pollution, but it was always about the class being too noisy. Like if we were outside at recess, they would yell at us, "Hey, you're causing noise pollution." And I didn't really understand what that meant. What do you mean noise pollution? It's not like putting smoke in the air. What does that mean? but you kind of hit on it there. Like the EPA says, it's unhealthy to be around that much noise.
Yeah, exactly. It was like 150 years ago, Florence Nightingale, the famous British nurse, was running a hospital during the Crimean War. And the conditions in the hospital were just like totally atrocious. There was like gangrene gone unattended and just awful sanitary conditions. And amidst all of that, she was super focused on the issue of the noise. And people at the time thought she was crazy for it. But she said unnecessary noise is the most cruel absence of care that could be inflicted on a person either sick or well. And like in the 150 years since then, like all this peer-reviewed research has verified that what she was saying was basically that noise drives the fight or flight response in the nervous system, which inhibits healing, and it also increases risk of heart disease and stroke and depression. And to what you were saying about the noise pollution in schools, in the 1970s there was a environmental psychologist named Arlene Bronzaft who looked at the scores of Manhattan middle school students whose classrooms were exposed to elevated subway tracks, and the classrooms that were directly exposed to that noise, which was pretty high decibel, lagged up to a full year behind the students who were in the quieter classrooms. So it was like, yes, it was that fight or flight response that was driven by the actual volume of the noise, but it was also that the interruption broke the students' concentration and then undermined their ability to follow the lessons and, keep a coherent progression of thought.
Wow. And you do hear things often like New Yorkers are always in such a hurry. They're always overstressed. You would think probably that noise, that just that whole environment, that noisy environment that we live in contributes greatly to that. I would imagine if it wasn't so noisy and we didn't have all this external stimuli, we would be able to relax more, right?
I would imagine that like if that fight or flight response is constantly being triggered, you're going to also end up with some sort of adrenal fatigue at some point. Which could, again, contribute to mental health issues or to being just tired or aggravated or irritated all of the time.
That's a big issue, Jay. Yeah, there was a study of whales actually right around the time of 9/11, whales in the Bay of Fundy in Canada. And they would actually like look at the like whale excrement, like how much cortisol was in there. And after shipping stopped briefly after 9/11, there was this rapid drop in the cortisol levels. And all of a sudden the whales started like singing again and they could hear each other. Whales are mammals like us. There haven't been large scale studies because you can't do a study, consistently tracking the noise levels a person's exposed to, over that much time. So the whales were like a pretty good proxy for a lot of different mammals, what the effects of noise on the cortisol levels in the body over a long time would be. So, and it's added to, like I was mentioning before, not just the auditory noise, but the informational noise and the internal noise. I mean, think about how, when Eric Schmidt was CEO of Google in 2010, he said that every 2 days we now create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization until 2003.
Wow, that's a lot. That's crazy. Wow.
So it's like, man, so it's like the human being's upward bounds of how much information we could take in hasn't increased all that much, if at all. So it's like we're dealing with, not just increased auditory noise, especially in big cities, but the increased informational noise.
Right.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, I know you have to go in a few minutes. Before you do, I just wanted to get your thoughts on what we can do. I mean, what are the solutions here to make a less noisy society?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, man. In the New York Daily News piece that we wrote, we look at some of what's been happening in the city and in New York State. In 2007, the city really started taking the issue seriously. And it was the first time in 30 years that New York overhauled the actual noise ordinance code. So, it worked on basically creating standards and fines around construction, for example, that would happen too late at night. There's been some stuff around like subwoofers, but the main thing is there's not really too much application of those fines when it comes, for example, to after hours, late night construction. Ends up being kind of a who question sometimes. So that's part of it. There's some work happening now around, to the question around decibel levels. Decibel levels in some restaurants, for example, being actually beyond the levels that could damage hearing. So looking at some ways to have some ordinances around some of those issues.
Justin, I don't know if you saw, but New York State recently passed a law that now requires cop cars to have decibel readers in them, and they're actually setting limits on the amount of noise that's allowed. Whereas before it was a very subjective thing, and there was really no way of measuring it objectively. Now at least they're trying to quantify it in some ways.
That's a really good step for sure. Yeah, and this, yeah. Go ahead.
Now I was going to say that, in regards to a law like that, and I'm seeing in news recently, I think it might have been in Florida, where they're going to be checking decimal levels coming out of cars. And like, if we can hear your radio 1 car away, then you can get a ticket for it, which is really still very low. And they're using it to kind of attack people in their cars listening to music, which tends to be younger generational people playing their music, or in minority neighborhoods where they roll around with certain things. So like, it can be used to attack these younger or minority situations, demographics. Do you see anything connection to that type of stuff in your
Absolutely. Yeah, Jay, I'm really glad you raised this. I mean, there was an Atlantic article recently called "Why Rich People Love Quiet" that pointed out that efforts to control noise can sometimes have really serious negative effects and just reflect the preferences of, privileged and powerful communities in a place. So I'm actually not a big advocate for that kind of thing you're talking about. Like, I don't think that would actually be so helpful. I think dealing with industrial noise, dealing with these kinds of pervasive noises that are really driving most of this fight or flight response is the real issue. It's not about changing, trying to enforce change in a community. But the focus of this book, Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise, that we wrote, is really, for the most part, how we think about moving beyond a society that equates constant barrage of information with progress. The way we measure GDP, for example, isn't just how much industrial stuff we're creating. It's how much sound and stimulus and data we're creating. But that's often not what's most conducive to human thriving. It's oftentimes of pristine attention when we're beyond the noise of the modern world, when we're happiest, when we're playing with our kids or getting time in a park or in nature, or making, a piece of art or music or something like that. So really our focus in the book is, how do we get beyond a world that's obsessed with more and more noise, in the sense of industrial noise, in the sense of needing to fill the space often. So we look, for example, at, what can be done around industrial noise and some of those examples I was talking about, construction noise. But one of the important things, relevant to New York, for example, is like thinking about what employers could do to reduce the noise of modern life in an office, whether that's managing the volume in an open plan office or creating quiet spaces where people can rest and nap and take breaks, or also giving workers the right to disconnect from email and laptops and phones and, other kinds of electronic tethers after the workday's ended. Because the noise isn't just jackhammers, the noise is that need to stay always connected.
Right, yeah. So not just auditory noise, but just like you said, being connected all the time. And on the auditory, I did look it up real quick here. The EPA and the WHO recommend maintaining an environmental noise level below 70 dBA. And the Miracle Ear, which is that company that does hearing aids, they said that you should only have exposure to decibels above 100 for 15 minutes. So you're talking about in the cities, some of these decibel levels are incredibly high and people are having constant exposure. That's, sounds like it can be a recipe for disaster for people. And
yeah, we've got more about that in the book. It wasn't coming, the numbers weren't coming to me offhand, but there's a little bit more about, how to understand the decibel levels in different cities and why this is the top complaint for New Yorkers and people in so many cities. So it's really about respecting human attention,
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
About that.
It seems like a lot of it really is internal. As a society, we just need to do better in respecting boundaries and just being cognizant of the fact that too much noise in more forms than one is harmful to us. And let's, I think the first step is recognizing that, and then we can internally, collectively as a people, just say, hey, we're going to be more respectful of this.
Exactly.
Could that also be, this idea of silence or this idea of quiet and that being able to have that peaceful time also lends to how effective things like meditation can be when you sit in silence and try to tune out all that noise to, allows you not just your, your ears, but your internal things to calm down and relax. I know you got to go here, Justin. I know we wanted to briefly say, if you've got a second here, someone in the chat said, I'm used to the noise. It usually doesn't bother me. Do we actually really get used to it?
It's a really good question, because I notice that when I'm in noisy places. But, this insight Florence Nightingale had all those years ago, and the research that's come since shows that it really does drive that fight or flight response. And over the long run, that has impacts, with respect to heart disease, with respect to insomnia, with respect to depression and anxiety. And it's things we can't always tell, can't always see. With what you said, Jay, just before I run, the book we think of as a kind of non-meditator's guide to getting beyond the noise. I worked on Capitol Hill in DC with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and Congressional Black Caucus for many years on policy issues. And I started up a meditation program on Capitol Hill. And so that's my background, teaching meditation in addition to public policy and economic policy. And for me, it was like, I see so many people who just beat themselves up for not meditating enough, or don't keep up the practice or this and that. So this book, Golden, is really a non-meditator's guide to getting beyond the noise. Like, how do we not need all the rules and tools of meditation, but just tune into the silence where we can find it?
That sounds like a good thing too.
Well said. So the book is called Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. I think Jay was going to ask where it's available.
It's wherever books are sold. It's coming out in 14 languages, thankfully, and it's HarperCollins in the U.S. So you can find it on Amazon or Bookshop. Really good to be with you guys.
Excellent. Justin Zorn, thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, guys. Be well.
You too. You. Alixa's asking, is it on Kindle? I imagine it is on Kindle. I imagine it is on Kindle. What was the name of that again, Mike?
It's called Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. I'm on the Amazon site right now. It is available on Kindle.
Okay.
I could share screen this maybe, so you can see.
Absolutely.
Did that come up, the Amazon site? Yeah. Okay, there it is.
It is on Kindle.
There you see. It looks like audio CD as well.
Yep. So that's very interesting. And you mentioned, like you said, when you were younger, you remember teachers talking about noise pollution, and it was a big topic at one point. And apparently it has an effect. I mean, I think any kind of long-term constant stimulation will have an effect on us, whether we recognize it consciously or not. It's something
right. And that's the thing, it was mentioned in the chat that the noise doesn't bother them because they're used to it, but that could be a problem, right? Like when we become so desensitized to these negative signals. I mean, it doesn't make it healthy just because we're used to it. Actually, that could be a bad thing to get used to something that's having a negative effect on us.
Right. We can kind of tune some of those things out, but it doesn't mean it's not still there. Like it's still digging in at your subconscious and at your nerves and at your adrenals. And like I said, he was saying the fight or flight response, it's all.
I mean, to make a crude analogy, it's like someone building a tolerance to alcohol. They say, well, now I can drink a ton of alcohol and it doesn't bother me. But what are you doing to your body? You're getting used to it, maybe, like, on a surface level, but what's happening inside, it doesn't mean that that's healthy.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, there's some things that we should think about, as far as we should keep those things in mind when building or when creating our societies and planning communities, to try to, allow people to have that lower levels that can allow them to relax and whatnot. Liver psoriasis, yeah, that tolerance to alcohol will build up liver psoriasis. So sounds like an interesting study and
yeah, no, absolutely. You always hear that. I mean, even there are hip hop songs that come to mind. There was a song Slum Village, Selfish. I think they talked about New York women are way too fresh, too much on your mind. Like it's a thing. Like people acknowledge that New Yorkers is almost like a stereotype even, but there's truth to it, that we just have so much going on because of all that noise. And it isn't just loudness, right? Like we talked about, it's just all of that stimulation that we're always bombarded with. And it does have an effect on us. And I really believe that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because if it's constant barrage of everything, like can your nervous system and, you know, all of that really relax, you know, like you're constantly being stimulated and it's going to be paying attention to some of these things at some level.
So why don't we ask a poll question based on this conversation about whether people personally feel affected by the noise levels of New York City?
All right, go for it.
Oh, it's on me. I was hoping that you would just kind of like run with that. All right. I mean, let me think of how I can phrase it then. All right, let's freestyle this one. The poll question of the week is, do you personally feel affected emotionally or mentally by the noise levels that are prevalent in New York City?
I think that's a pretty good question there. Yeah, that sounds good. We'll put some links into the book and to the article, the op-ed that he wrote. And he has actually a couple, you mentioned briefly the Washington Post one, but there's also one he wrote for Time magazine that I guess we didn't get a chance to. But again, this is his thing talking about silence, how listening to silence changes our brains. That's a Time article. And the Washington Post one is, we once had a law to defend human attention. So there's a noise control ordinance to kind of require there be, you know, certain levels of, or below certain levels, I assume.
We all should just unplug every once in a while also. Try to go a day without using your smartphone so much. Or, you know, I'm not saying you don't have it. It might be good for emergency purposes or what have you, but try not to be on it so much. I mean, and try to force yourself, like say this day, next Tuesday or whatever, I'm not going to use my device. I'm going to enjoy the weather or act like it's pre-smartphone era again. You know, I think that could be helpful too.
Right. In the chat, Lixa said that they're trying to get out of NYC at least once a month. They book a cabin in an isolated area on Airbnb. And, you know, it's good to be able to wind down or do something like that. And there might even be places that are, you know, maybe out on Long Island or whatnot, or away from that hustle and bustle that people can go just kind of wind down and chill. Even, you know, getting over to the beach. Maybe there's some beach areas on the Rockaways, you know, that you can just go and just chill and, you know.
Right. Even Lake George, which isn't that far away. I went there a couple of years ago, did some kayaking, you know, took some pictures of me on the phone, like taking phone meetings on the kayak for a change of pace. But it's that change of scenery and just, you know, getting away from, like you said, like the hustle and bustle of the big city. I think that's helpful.
You were kayaking?
Well, you said, do I go kayaking?
Yeah, I said you went kayaking?
I did. Well, here's what I did. I stayed at this resort on Lake George, and they literally had kayaks that you could just take and just use. Like those, you didn't have to sign them out or anything. They were just laying there, like for the guests, and it's on the lake. So I just took one of the kayaks and launched it into the lake and went for a little bit. It was cool.
Okay. I don't know why. I just know why. I just can't imagine you kayaking.
Really?
Yeah, like you would just look at it and be like, nah, I'm okay.
No, I enjoyed it. I found it relaxing actually, but I do prefer jet skiing because I'm more of, I guess, that luxury type dude. I don't know, but you know, jet skiing is easier to do than kayaking, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you have to put in some manual effort on jet skiing. I mean, jet skiing,
more so on the kayak, but believe it or not, jet skiing long distances does require you to be in shape because you have to hold that position for a long time.
Well, it also is hell on your butt because that jet ski, when you hit them waves, just like starts pounding you. It's just, yeah.
You also get drenched and you need plenty of suntan lotion. Also, I found that out the hard way. I was getting like sunburn on my feet, like because from the rays were bouncing everywhere. You know, it was nuts.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But all right, so we just did the poll question. We kind of winged it. Let's look at the poll results from last week because I thought they were interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, that was a recycled poll question. So really, we originally asked it 2 weeks ago, but we put it up on our stories over this past week. So we have results now that we can share.
Right. Yeah. And that was, I'd say we had probably the most comments of any poll that we put up on YouTube with this one, as far as just comments and responses. And the poll, for people that might not remember, is: should selling new gas cars be banned by 2035?
Do you agree?
Oops, there we go. And overwhelmingly on the YouTube poll, it was no in the comments.
Yeah, I actually got a comment here. I posted mine to Facebook and Instagram, and I've got my results, and I'm going to share the combined result as well. But I did have a comment on Facebook that I wanted to share. It was kind of a thought that I had as well. Really, a lot of this is in the approach and the details, right? How is this going to be done? I think there's a lot of cynicism as to if it can be accomplished by 2035, if these milestones can be met. What's it going to look like, given where we are now? I think we seem so far away from that, though it is a laudable goal to move towards electric and obviously help the environment. We're talking about noise pollution. This obviously is another form of pollution that's very important to keep under control. But here is a comment that I received by Kevin Flaherty on Facebook. He says, 100% not possible in the city. How many car owners live in apartment buildings? How many New Yorkers rent? Where are they / we supposed to charge our cars? I don't see landlords adding charging stations to their rental properties. I see the few electric car owners from Dayton Towers charging their cars daily at Stop and Shop on 72nd. Either Dayton Towers or Dayton Beach Park. He just said Dayton, but he means the complexes in Rockaway. What is the plan? Where is the plan to add infrastructure, or does the city plan on doing it the way they do everything else, put a rule in place, let the public figure it out? So there's cynicism there. And I think a lot of that cynicism is well-founded.
No, I agree. I think like you said, that there's a lot of questions around how this is going to be implemented, how it's going to work and make that happen. Because yeah, like that was a good point. Like, where are they going to put them, especially people living in the city, where the charging station is going to go? There's already a lack of extra space in the city. Where are you going to do to add these things? Or I guess they would have to be added on at gas stations.
We don't know how that technology is going to work. I mean, it does take longer to charge up your car than it does to fill it up with gas. Now, I know that there are advances in technology to make it quicker. We looked at some of that, but it's still a pretty long process. And you can have long lines, I would think, unless you could somehow streamline that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we looked at it before. Someone said something like it was like 30 minutes to do a full charge or something like that.
And that's like a super fast one, right? I mean, I think the ones you get at most people like their house do it overnight, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. And so, gas at the gas station is 5 minutes. So if people are trying to charge up at rush hour, you're just, it's not going to work. You're going to have a backlog like really crazy. So they're going to have a lot to deal with between now and 2035 in order to make this something that's really viable.
Right. And we have to look at which areas will be disproportionately affected. Rockaway, for example, always seems to get the short end of the stick. This is going to be another example of that. We're always behind on infrastructure. We're fighting for infrastructure upgrades. What if this becomes a mandate by 2035 and we don't have that infrastructure in place in a place like Rockaway for anyone to do it? We already have bad public transportation, as we rallied over last week, right? And now you're going to take away gas cars, and electric cars, as we know, are a lot more money. So it seems like this could be a recipe for disaster unless it's done the right way. But as of now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of confidence in achieving that, just based on where we are, and I guess based on the history of some of these things.
Right. Yeah. And then as Fury brought up in the interview, as far as, and we talked about it as well, about the costs. A lot of electric cars are more expensive than gas-powered vehicles right now. So are those costs going to come down? The cost of ownership going to come down? How long are those batteries good for? Do you have to change those out? There's a lot of questions, and I'm sure that the people who are pushing for this are probably aware of this type of information, you would hope. And there might probably plans in place to kind of.
I'm going to keep it real, Jay. Honestly, I truly believe most of the people pushing for this don't drive and have a certain disdain for people who do drive.
There's probably a few people like that as well. I think I mean, we also know there's an environmental issue here, component of it, and reliance on gasoline and the pollution that comes out of those gas-powered vehicles is a big thing, especially in the midst of climate change and the rising extremes in weather. So, I mean, that's something that we have to look at.
Yes.
And also, there's another component as well to it. If we're off of gas cars, that reduces the power of regimes like Saudi Arabia and these places in the Middle East that could be funding these terrorist organizations as well, that you know, that can play into that as well. They have less money to toss around. There could be some benefits there as well.
I do think we need to get off oil, right, in the long run. But I do think also, like I mentioned last week, a lot of this is just about the way you talk about the issue. If it was we're moving towards electric cars or electric vehicles, I think you might be met with less cynicism than we're going to ban gas cars by this year. Everything is put in terms of the negative, which immediately just brings out that negative attention from people, especially when you put it in the context of everything else going on. I mean, the congestion pricing, lack of good public transportation, the 24/7 speed cameras. It just seems like another punitive measure or like something against the people, as opposed to, hey, let's as a society all move towards this new goal. It just seems like we're saying we're going to punish you more. We're going to hit you with more fines if you don't comply. We're going to make it harder on you. You know, it seems like the conversation is framed in the negative.
I think one of the first steps in that, before, you know, get into we're going to ban all sales of gas cars, would be, you know, let's make all new sales of cars be hybrids, right? So, but again, the price is still going to have to come down because even hybrids are more expensive. But it's a halfway step to get there. So, and then, you know, there's other questions as well. I mean, just because it's an electric vehicle doesn't mean there's zero pollution. Like, what about the materials that they use to make the batteries? And what about the waste of the batteries? Is that something that can be dealt with? How does that work? And again, these questions are probably above you know, my understanding and pay grade, but they're probably, I would imagine that those studies have been done and whatnot.
Well, what is the phrase? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Okay, that sounds
I think that's the phrase, right? Like, meaning if you have something that's an improvement,
right,
it's an improvement. Don't say it has to be perfect or we're not going to do it. So I don't think you can ever get to zero pollution, but if you can substantially reduce it, that's a step in the right direction. And we need to keep moving towards that. It's like strive towards perfect. No, you're never going to get there. Exactly.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's good. It's a good look. But it just says, again, there's so much work that needs to be done to make this something where a lot of these questions are answered and it's not such a hardship on other people while being able to do something for the environment.
Right.
And again, I brought it up the other time. This is kind of, I would imagine this kind of question, that this kind of thing that they're going through is similar to when people were thinking about, you know, cars in the beginning and, okay, well, how are we going to fuel them? You know, that means there's going to have to be gas stations like every 10 miles or so. We're going to have to fill the country with this. And so that same type of planning is, I guess, what we're looking at now, just in regards to electrical charging stations.
Yeah, I mean, except back then, I think we got things done quicker and more efficiently as a society. Even our governments worked better back then, right? I mean, look at how long it took to build the Empire State Building versus, you know, today trying to get something of that magnitude done. I think we're in a different time.
Yeah, but you know, the planning. Someone has to have that big thought to
I agree,
to put it into motion. I mean, you know, we've got electricity. The whole nation is wired, and you know, just the thought of building that network. Imagine sitting down like, okay, look, we got electricity. Imagine sending wires across the whole country. What? There's like 4,000 miles across here. Like, are you crazy? Yeah. We're gonna do it between each area. Every home is gonna be wired. Like, that's just ridiculous. That's, you know.
But given where we are now, is 2035 realistic to meet that goal? And can it be done? Can these concerns that you brought up be met? Or are we going to be dealt with the situation where it's going to be this regulation that we have to deal with, and it's just too expensive for everyone and people can't get around it anymore?
Yeah, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see that coming up. Yeah.
So here are the numbers. I guess I should mention the numbers on my poll on Facebook. And again, the question is, do you agree that the sale of new gas cars should be banned by 2035? Facebook, 17% yes, 83% no. Instagram, 8% yes, 92% no. And then when you combine the two, it was 11% yes, 89% no.
Yeah, it tracks. I think it's probably people need answers to these questions, and just saying, oh, we're banning it by 2035 doesn't answer anything. It's like, okay, well, what are you doing? What about everything else? So there needs to be more communication in that regard to let people know what it is that's coming.
And I think saying 2035 kind of sounds meaningless to some people. I mean, honestly, it's not that far away. Again, when you think of in terms of how government works, it might sound like a long time, but it's not. I mean, you might as well say, can we ban the gas cars by tomorrow or by next year? I mean, to people, it's like it's a shock. Like we're nowhere near close to that goal. How are we going to get there in such a short time?
Absolutely. Well, I guess we're about to see. But yeah, on the YouTube, like I said, YouTube poll, it was 100% no. Facebook poll, I don't remember but I think there were a couple of yeses, but the majority was no. Overwhelmingly, people were no. So.
I also think if you start looking at who's saying yes, it's going to be mostly people who don't drive at all.
It could be, but there's also people who recognize that, we have a pollution problem.
Sure.
Climate change problem. We have, a fossil fuels problem. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
that right there, that's a good plan right there. In the chat, Lixa said, need to stock up on a few gas cards and hold them to sell after 2035. So go through and buy a bunch of them now. After 2035, you might have some.
Well, let's buy them all 2034 and then flip them. We can buy them on New Year's Eve, right? Day before,
cards or something,
and then sell them. And they're technically used cars, right? But they just never driven. So that's a hustle.
Yeah. She's in there hustling, trying to get paid.
For the record, I don't condone that because I do take this environmental concern seriously. I just have questions, as many do, about the rollout and how this is going to be implemented, and hoping that we don't end up getting the short end of the stick again, as we do in Rockaway and parts of South Queens and certain parts of the city, as we deal with time and time again. And here's another example of that front page of the Wave, fighting for the Queens Link.
Ooh,
and I do want to shout out our local media outlets that covered the rally that we did. It was the front page of the Wave, recognizing, of course, the importance of this issue. It was one of the Rockaway Times, as well as page 3 of the Rockaway Times. You can see a story about the rally there. It was Queens Chronicle as well. It says, bottom left corner, not the way, supporters push rails over trails. And then you go to page 4 of the Queens Chronicle. And here you go. You can see the rally covered, page 4 of the Queens Chronicle. So the local media in South Queens definitely recognized it for the issue that it is. I was a little bit disappointed to see a lack of coverage from some of the other media outlets, namely the news channels. I would have liked to see New York One there. I would like to see Pix 11 and Eyewitness News and some of the big outlets as well. Shout out to Assemblymember Khalil Anderson, who was, of course, at the rally. We go way back with him. He posted on Twitter that some of these news outlets were finally able to find Rockaway on the map when more violence occurred. It was an attack on the subway. Now they're all out there, right? But why aren't they out there? This is my question. Why aren't they all out there when we do a rally for the Queens Link, for example, which would be an example of a more positive story, but also a story that just doesn't revolve around violence and sensationalism? Maybe that's the answer to the question. But I do think that we should kind of hold people's feet to the fire and say there's more to Rockaway than that. Why do you only find Rockaway on a map when something bad happens?
Right. Yeah. And we mentioned that before. Jesus Christ, it's gonna mess with me. There's a lyric, I think, by Anderson .Paak that mentioned that. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, people have had that issue with media before. Like, why are you only covering negative news stories?
If it bleeds, it leads. That's the quote.
I'm sorry?
The quote that you often hear is, if it bleeds, it leads.
Oh. Okay. So yeah, that's right. The Anderson .Paak quote from the song from Dr. Dre, "Animals." He says, "And please don't come around these parts. The only tell me we're all a bunch of animals. The only time they want to turn the cameras on is when we're messing stuff up."
Mm.
So,
but that's a real problem. I mean, it's funny because I even had the comment internally amongst the Queens Link folks. I was like, all right, we're trying to get these media outlets to the rally. Don't be surprised if a lot of them don't show up because they think Rockaway is too far. And that's exactly what we were out there rallying for, better transportation to and from the Rockaways. But a lot of them, you know, we say this all the time, they can't find Rockaway on the map. It's not that they literally can't find it, it's that they don't go there. And as a result, there's a lot of ignorance that stems from that. That's why they'll call the entire peninsula Far Rockaway, or they'll think it's all. That's why when it comes to, for example, going back to the train issue, you're pushing for this train. You have a lot of people who have ignorance about the Rockaways. They call it the Rockaway Beach Line, or they hear that it was the Rockaway Beach Line. They think that means that all these people from Far Rockaway who are committing these crimes that are on the news are going to be coming through their town because they're not getting the full picture of what Rockaway actually is.
Let me ask a question. Do these media companies and news stations, do they not have correspondents in the Rockaways?
Correspondents in the Rockaways?
like people that cover that beat and spend time out there regularly. I mean,
no. You might get lucky and find someone who works for one of these outlets who's from the Rockaways or is familiar with it, but there's not like a Rockaway person assigned to, you know, eyewitness news.
Right. I'm just thinking because, you know, you think in places like Queens and in Brooklyn, there's regular coverage of these spots. And part of it could be because there's easy access to get there to these stories. But yeah.
It's a real problem. I mean, even campaigning, you know, we go back to, all right, so, you know, we should run for office on the idea of better transportation. And we've, of course, done that and we've had success doing that. And that's all good. But then you try to get more people to come in and help you with the campaign. And what do they tell you? We don't campaign down there because it takes too long for us to get there. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, the whole campaign is on this idea of better transportation, but you can't even run the campaign to do that because people can't get to you to even help you with the campaign. You know what I mean? Like it's you're stuck. It's like we're really cut off in multiple ways here, and it's really costing us.
Right. I don't know if you could hear the background noise. There was vacuuming going on. I don't know. Sorry if anyone can hear that. Yeah, I'm in the hotel, so.
Okay. Nice hotel, I hope.
It's a regular hotel in Japan. You know, it's not too big. So like we mentioned at the top, I'm up here in Tokyo for a couple of days.
Yes, so why don't you talk about that? What are you up to in Tokyo?
Well, yeah, I came up to Tokyo. I was guest speaker at 2 classes at Temple University, Japan yesterday. The first one was talking about American social movements, and the second one was the significance of race in America. And you know, we had some good discussions. They were talking about things like, you know, conditions of African Americans in the U.S., racism in the U.S., BLM, also how BLM Tokyo got together, because actually it was started. The foundations of it was from a student at Temple University, Japan. Started that first march that kind of kicked a lot of things off, and so yeah, we talked about a few things like that, and they're covering other stuff like, you know, defund the police and cancel culture and, you know, these types of stuff. So they brought me in to speak to the class, and I actually spoke to one of the classes previously back in June, but it was a remote because I wasn't in Tokyo. And this time I'm up here because today, this afternoon, I'm supposed to be doing a TED Talk. So, yeah.
So what is the TED Talk on?
TED Talk is on, so the theme is sub rosa, which is a Latin phrase which means basically behind the scenes, done in secret, or behind closed doors. And so I'm going to be talking about what prevents people, some of the things that prevent people from taking action or contributing to a cause. And a lot of times it can be, you know, fears and doubts and concerns and cynical thoughts that prevent them from getting involved. And I want to talk about and show that this is very normal, it's common and even people who do get involved have these same thoughts. You know, Dr. King had some of these thoughts before even getting involved. He was actually reluctant to even get involved in the first place, and just, you know, talk about that, and that, but people still need to jump in and get involved. So,
yeah, I mean, do you touch on lack of transportation being a reason people get involved in these fights?
I have not. You know, mainly, you know, stuff like they haven't, they don't know where to start, or they fear failure, or they have doubts about their own ability to get in or be able to contribute anything, or just about anything being effective. Like, you know,
Right.
you always hear nothing ever changes, or why vote, or this always stays the same. And so, and to be honest, I share some of those doubts, even if I do work, and, you know, we've done marches together, and like, we still have those things like, you know, is this going to really do anything? Because, you know, especially with racism and discrimination, we're seeing rises of that in the US. And even though all this work has been done, it's like how we're seeing increases in it. So every step
Right.
back brings that back up for people, you know.
Well, it's like this rally that we just did. I mean, I kind of had the same feeling. Like, it feels great
Right.
to be out there protesting and rallying and getting all the speakers. And it's like, it's a great event, good coverage. But then you all go home and you face the reality. Okay, but $35 million was still allocated for this park plan. I mean, no matter how much screaming we do about it,
Right.
that was still done. But I will say this, and I don't want to give anything away, but there has been a positive result coming from that. You know, now we're in more rooms. Now certain things are moving that weren't before. So I do think that it does help. I mean, even if it may not be immediate or what we expect or want it to be, the more we do, the more results we see over the long run.
Absolutely, and that's kind of what I point to. I'm going to point to in the talk this afternoon, and I liken it to this quote that I like from Lao Tzu. Well, I used two Lao Tzu quotes, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, and the first one is, you know, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So regardless of what you feel, what you fear, concern, or whatever, you have to still, that first step needs to happen for any action to go. But there's also the quote from Lao Tzu that's every step is on the path, which is not really quoted as often. But if you take a macro view of these types of movements or these issues, then it means every action, everything, even successes and failures and setbacks, all of it is a step on that path towards that ultimate goal. So even, you know, in the fight for the Rockaways, like you said, you know, 35 million was allocated, and even though you're doing these rallies and stuff, but there has been some progress on it. There has been a couple of different things, and so all this can contribute to moving forward on the issue. It's that sustained pressure and action that can ultimately make something change in the long run.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Even thinking about when we sent that letter to the mayor and the governor signed by those 15 elected officials, I saw on Twitter someone was impressed. They're like, wow, how'd you get 15 elected officials to come out in favor of your project? And I was thinking to who these elected officials were. These are folks that we've known for a long time, and we've been talking about this issue with them for a very long time, even before they got elected. So it's
Right.
that long-term change. Like, so now you have 15 people in Queens who are in office supporting this plan, but that didn't happen overnight. That was a long-term play where we were just all talking with these folks, to anyone who was willing to hear it. And yeah, over time, now there are, as it so happens, enough people in office who support this plan that makes a big difference. Whereas 10 years ago, that wasn't the case because we weren't talking about it on a consistent basis to these folks. Right. You know what I mean? So it is that long-term pressure. You have to have faith that things are going to move in the right direction. If you do your part to move it, it's like, you know, trying to push a big boulder. You might not see it move right in front of you, but enough people keep doing it, it is going to move over time. Right. A quote I think about is Mother Teresa. Not to get all religious, but, you know, she was always asked about if she ever had doubts. And she said, absolutely, she doubted her faith. And she said that you don't actually have faith if you don't have doubts. So you have to be able to acknowledge that, you know, you're not a true believer if you don't ever doubt it either.
Yeah. And it's healthy too. And it's normal. It's natural. You know, and it's not a reason to give up, and it's not a reason to not take any sort of action. The surest way for nothing to ever change or nothing to get done is to do nothing. So, you know.
And there's a lot of power in that because you have nothing to lose almost at that point. It's like, all right, if I'm not happy about a certain situation, if I do nothing, it's not going to change. If I do something, maybe it'll change. You can say maybe it won't, but you know that's not if you don't do anything. So you might as well go for it. You might as well put your effort into it.
Right, right. So that's what I'm up here for today. Yeah, trying to do that practice today so I don't go up there and screw up.
Yeah, that's definitely a good fight to fight. Speaking of which, the governor signed measures into law to aid domestic violence survivors. And they're meant to ensure the privacy of victims and survivors. There's a 5-law package, actually, that was signed. October marks Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so it's appropriate. I actually just recently discovered that a bill that I drafted was signed into law last year about domestic violence. It creates a domestic violence advocate-client privilege, similar to the attorney-client privilege, where it protects confidential communications made between domestic violence advocates and their clients. And this way it incentivizes open communication because the victim now doesn't have to fear that what they say could be used in court. In other words, the advocate cannot be compelled to testify as to this private information anymore. You would think that that would be already the law, but it wasn't until
you would
last
think
year it was signed into law. Right. Yeah. I was actually surprised to see it because I was meeting with the domestic violence advocate and we were talking about some of the reforms we might want to work on. So I brought up this bill and I knew that it had passed the state Senate and I just didn't know that it passed the assembly and was signed by the governor. That was actually news to me. So I looked up the bill because we want to talk about the details behind the legislation. I said, let me pull this up. We can kind of have a better conversation on it. I saw it. It said passed assembly signed by governor. I was like, wow. And actually Governor Cuomo at the time, this was before he left office last year, he made a statement on it. Which was, again, I didn't never even notice this. I think because I was in the middle of my campaign when this was happening, it kind of just got past me. So there you go. It is state law now. It's New York state law that you have a domestic violence advocate client privilege. So if you're a domestic violence victim speaking with an advocate, that advocate cannot be compelled to testify in court anymore.
And they didn't call you. They didn't call you and be like, oh, well, we passed your bill, man.
No. And I wrote it, I drafted the language for it when I was working in Albany as legislative director and counsel in the Senate in the office of Senator Sanders. So he had sponsored it. And then was, of course, also an assembly sponsor. But what happens is that was back in 2016 when we introduced that legislation. And so a lot of these, again, be a perfect example of long-term pressure, right? A lot of these don't, in fact, almost all of them don't get passed right away. It's year after year they get put back in. And so some of these bills are 5-10 years old. Some are even longer, and they finally get passed. But so now the senator, he's had a few different legislative directors. I'm sure he doesn't know which ones helped bring forward which bills because he's got like a collection of bills now that were, piling up over the years. And so it was one of his bills, but it was a bill. I mean, I definitely recognize it from 2016 because at the time I was thinking, all right, what legislation do we want to introduce in New York? I kind of had like a blank slate to just present ideas. I would discuss them with the senator and we would go forward with them if he approved them. And that was one that I saw that was being done in other state legislatures. So like that was kind of one of the sources of my ideas. I said, let me look to see what's going on around the country in other states. And I might have been Connecticut. I forget which state was pushing this bill. I said, you know what? That would be great to do in New York. I was surprised we didn't already have it in New York. And so we drafted it for New York. That was definitely one of the ones on my roster that I got in, and now it feels good. And it's about 2016 to 2020, really it's 2021. So 5 years later it took to become law, but it is law now. And so I'm proud of that. I think it's something that's going to help victims, people who are struggling with domestic violence throughout the state.
Absolutely. And speaking to that long-term thing, that there's that saying in the entertainment business, like it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. So yes, absolutely. I used to tell people that years ago when, I was doing stuff at Raucous and I had some things going on in hip hop in New York, people would contact me and they'd be like, oh, how'd you get there? How could I do what you do? And I said, you got to work at it. I mean, spend 10 years grinding it out and be consistent and you can get somewhere, but don't expect it to happen overnight. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I guess the lesson here is to take action, even amongst doubts, even amongst fears and concerns and worries and cynicism. it's still worth it to do the fight.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. Well, I don't see any other choice.
Oh snap! Did I just do the bottom line? What?
Yeah, let's do it. That's the bottom line. That's like a retroactive bottom line.
Or a pre bottom line. Yeah. So
let's see. That's like the Nas song Rewinds. I could say line bottom the is what? Carter J.
Yeah, right. Nas. Yeah. That's what's up. So,
yeah. Right. Well, shout out to everyone joining us in the chat. You know, like it's funny. There's a laugh emoji on the live video, and I believe was that Lixa?
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't think that they're intending to laugh at us doing this. I think we probably said something they found funny over the course of the show, and they reacted with a laugh emoji. But now it goes on there like they're laughing at the video, which is it's funny. I don't mind it. It's just kind of funny to me.
Yeah.
But shout out to everyone joining us in the chat. I see Jeffrey, Masonette. I see Lixa. I see James.
Yeah. But that's what's up. That's what's up. It looks like they're having a good conversation in the chat, and it's great. Again, everyone, if you're not following us on YouTube, go to YouTube and subscribe. We actually just hit 20,000 views on everything, so that's pretty dope. The polls are definitely getting some traction there.
So do we get one of those fancy award graphics for 20,000 like we did for 10,000?
Yeah, we get one of those. I sent that over to you.
Did you?
Yeah, I sent it to your in the chat. I sent you a link to it.
Okay, I must have missed that one.
Yeah.
All right, so that will be posted.
So steady progress, and I think it's it's good. There's been some good conversations and some good discussions and dialogue here. So I think it's all the good thing.
Yes, and before we wrap up, I do want to shout out the Ozone Park Block Association and the Lions Club, Howard Beach, Ozone Park, Howard Beach, Woodhaven Lions Club, for putting on the first ever Ozone Park Awards Gala this past week. I had the pleasure to attend, and it was a great success at the Roma View Catering Hall in Howard Beach. In fact, that place was packed out. Next year, they're going to have to go to a bigger spot because they're not going to be able to fit everyone in this. The event sold out, and it was great to see some of the people out there supporting the community and those who make it such a great place.
What's up?
So why don't you, I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, but where can people find us for those who don't know?
Right, we are on YouTube. Look up Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. Subscribe to the channel there. If you are interested in podcasts, we are everywhere podcasts are. So Spotify, Apple, Amazon. I even think it's on iHeart as well. Yes, Lixa said Spotify. Spotify definitely is out there. And interesting enough, it seems like in the analytics, the most listens come through from Apple podcast platform. So that's interesting. But yeah, so go there, subscribe to us. If you do this on the podcast, it automatically gets pushed to your podcast listening device, which can be your phone or computer. And so, yeah, definitely check that out.
Yes.
We need a website to put all this stuff on as well. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be good. Maybe some social media pages.
Yeah. So.
But we appreciate everyone. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, share if you can. It always helps. James, what's the score in the Yankees game? I know James is watching the Yankees game.
Yeah. I have to see what's going on there. But again, thank you to Justin for joining us. That was really interesting to hear. So we had links. I think we had links to the book in the chat. And also be Yanks. See, I said Yanks because as I was saying that, James's message came through in the chat, and he said the Yankees won. So
they won 5-1. I just saw that. Good. So the Yankees advanced to the championship series. All right, bring on the Astros.
Yeah. So I hope that doesn't happen to me today when I'm doing the speech. Like, Yes, and then Dr. Martin Luther King said the Yankees won. Wait, hold up. That's not what I want to say.
Well, I know you got some rehearsing to do, so we can wrap this thing up.
Yeah, some rehearsing. I need to get some food first, and then I'm going to be running through this speech. It's you know, that's about 15 minutes long. So
not bad.
Yeah. So
by the way, speaking of speeches, you know, there was some question about when I spoke at the Queens Link rally. I mentioned that we're not against parks. We like puppies too, but we have to do what's best for the most people transportation. There was some confusion about that. I think some of the reporting maybe misconstrued that. I mean, and maybe that's partly my fault because of how I said it. The Queens Link plan is a compromise plan between trains and parks. So I didn't really mean to be like completely dismissive of parks. I mean, I did say we like parks. That was in there. We like parks. We like puppies too. So yeah, that does, I get it. That kind of comes off like, you know, maybe
a little flippant.
Yeah, a little flippant. And it was meant to be kind of like, kind of a funny quip. But I did want to be clear that we're definitely not against parks. We just don't want the parks to come at the expense of the train. That's really the big point.
Right. Yeah. And I saw those clips that everyone seemed to reference it as well. Like, didn't Sanders say something, and then someone else said something? Maybe it was Khalil. I don't know. Yeah,
it came up a few times, and I put up a video on that. I'm gonna keep putting up a few different videos from the rally to kind of show the highlights of it and keep that momentum going. Like we said, it's a long fight. You can't just do a one and done. You got to keep it up. So that's one way to do it.
Absolutely.
To everyone listening, please keep the conversation going about this issue, Queens Link, everything we talk about, whatever's important to you. Make sure that we keep talking about it and keep making noise on it. It's, you know, it's not good enough to just say it once, especially these days with all the noise, right? To tie it all together, all the noise that we have in our daily lives, in our society, things get lost in the mix very easily. So that consistency is key.
Absolutely. Oh my God, it sounds like a second bottom
line for the first time ever. Look at this. Two for the price of one.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely true. It's good to do. Appreciate all the well wishes in the chat and people joining us, and our guests.
Yes.
We've got some other guests coming up as well in the weeks to come. So that's great, you know.
Yeah. Thank you all as always. We'll catch you next time.